today I'm in Greenwood, Indiana, and I'm actually at Northwest Park in Greenwood, Indiana. And we're gonna talk about Greenwood in this video quite a bit actually, and just the fact that Greenwood seems to be a place that people think is much smaller than what it really is. Greenwood really is bigger than most people think. So we're gonna get into some of the details of why that is, what that looks like in this video, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, I'm Jason Compton with the Compton Home Group. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time to the channel and you want to know everything there is to know about living, of course, in Indianapolis, but places like Greenwood as well, then make sure you hit that subscribe button. Also tap the little bell so you're notified every time we do a new video. Now we have people reaching out to us from all over the country with questions about Indianapolis, Greenwood, all the cities and towns that surround Indianapolis. So if you have questions at all about any place in Indianapolis or around Indianapolis, cities and towns, make sure you reach out any way that you know how. We'll always have your back with those questions, and we'll certainly have your back when it comes time for you to make your move to the Indy Metro. All right, again, so I'm in Northwest Park in Greenwood, Indiana. So Greenwood, if you don't know where that is, it's a suburb, an actual city to the south of Indianapolis. And a lot of times it can get a little bit confusing as to where Greenwood really is. So if you're traveling south out of Indianapolis and you go into Greenwood, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes that you've done that. And by the way, it's a really super hot day. So I'm trying to stay in the shade and out of the sun a little bit here. So I may come in and out of it. And just walking along this really nice path. It's actually a hot day, but it's a beautiful day out here in this park. So if you're going from Indianapolis into Greenwood, as soon as you pass County Line Road, you know you're in Greenwood. So Greenwood is in Johnson County to the south of Indianapolis, and Indianapolis is Marion County. It makes up most of Marion County with just a few exceptions, and one of which actually is one of the things that gets confused with Greenwood really quite often. That would be Southport, which is an excluded city in Indianapolis. Not big, it's less than 2,000 people, and that and Indianapolis just kind of blends in here with Greenwood. So sometimes you might think you're in Greenwood and you're really not, you're in Indianapolis. And it can also be the other way around. You might think you're in Indianapolis, but you're not, you're in Greenwood. But Greenwood just by itself as a city is actually larger than what most people think. There's about 65,000 people in Greenwood proper, in Greenwood itself. Sorry, I thought I just saw something just about jumping out of the woods at me. It kind of freaked me out just for a second, like an animal. So, not too many wild animals out here though, I would say. Probably quite safe. But Greenwood, 65,000 people, that's already bigger than what most people think it is. So if you look at some of the other cities that surround Indianapolis, some of the larger cities that surround Indianapolis, like Carmel. Carmel is certainly the biggest, so it's over 100,000 people in Carmel. There's right at 100,000, maybe a little bit over that in Fishers at this point. And if you get to a place like Noblesville, that is approximately the same size as what you got here in Greenwood. Noblesville is 64,000 people or so really similar in size to Greenwood. So definitely bigger, but then you have some other areas around Greenwood that it's already big enough, but make it seem a little bit bigger. So the Indianapolis portion I talked about, Southport, even though tiny, but that address can sometimes get confused. But you can get to Bargersville, which is just off to the south, and then you can get to New Whiteland. That can be a little bit confused with Greenwood as well. So this whole area is actually larger than what most people think. So if you were to look at a place just for comparison's sake, Noblesville, roughly the same size, and we look at the schools. So if you were to come to Greenwood or to Noblesville, what are your choices going to be? So if you go to Noblesville, you've got one school. You've got Noblesville Schools and you've got Noblesville High School, which is a pretty big high school actually. So there's over 3,000 kids at that high school. There's roughly 3,300 or so at the high school, at least at this point. I know that fluctuates, but if you look in Greenwood, it's not like you have choice where you can just go to any school that you want, but it depends on where you live. If you live in a particular neighborhood or a particular district, you might go to Greenwood Community Schools. And Greenwood High School actually isn't all that large. There's maybe 1,200 kids or so, something like that. So if you have a Greenwood address, you could certainly, if you live in the right area, go to Greenwood High School, and a highly rated school system for sure. So you can look up the statistics on Greenwood Community Schools, and I think you'd find they're pretty favorable for sure. Now, if you have a Greenwood address, you also might go to Center Grove schools. Now, Center Grove schools are very highly rated, so you can look that up as well and do the research on Center Grove schools and Center Grove High School, but it's much larger actually. You've got roughly 2,500 kids or so at Center Grove, so it is really much larger. It's roughly twice the size of Greenwood High School, but it serves Greenwood and Bargersville, both of those at the same time. So it's kind of getting into that stretch, that reach, that confusion that I talked about here towards the beginning of the video, where Bargersville can sometimes feel a little bit like Greenwood, even though it's not. You're gonna have a Bargersville address. But then you've also got Clark Pleasant community schools. So if you get over into Clark Pleasant actually has a little bit of Greenwood, it has a little bit of New Whiteland, and which is to the south, and even just dips into Franklin, Indiana a little bit. Not too far, but you could potentially have a Franklin address and still be in Clark Pleasant Community Schools. Now for Clark Pleasant, you're looking at Whiteland Community High School, and relatively large school. We're talking 1,900 kids or so. But again, that's part of Greenwood, part of New Whiteland, and a little bit of Franklin, so it does have some reach there. So when you include all of those areas around Greenwood, you may not have a Greenwood address, but you're kind of in this vicinity. This whole area is much bigger than what people think. And even Greenwood, like I said before, Greenwood just by itself is much bigger than what most people think, actually being over 60,000 people. And in Greenwood, you have absolutely everything that you could ever need on a daily basis. You've got Sam's Club, you got Costco, you have grocery stores, you have shops, restaurants, all of those things. Obviously, you have school systems here. And actually what I do like about the school systems here, that they all have a great reputation, but it is divided up, so they're all a little bit smaller. If you get into a place like Noblesville's fantastic too. This is not a knock on Noblesville at all, but sometimes a school system, or in a high school especially, when you get down to the elementary schools, then those are gonna be kind of capped at a particular size, and they just can't get much bigger. And what ends up happening is you just create more elementary schools if the population is growing. But sometimes the high school, they don't do that. They can add on to the high school, and the school population goes up. And from what I know right now, there is no plan, not that Noblesville's growing exponentially, but it's certainly going to keep growing in the future, for at least the foreseeable future. There's no plan to have an additional high school in Noblesville. So if you look in a place like Greenwood and some of the surrounding areas, there's room to grow, and there's also room to fit in more students in a lot of these school corporations. So really quite nice. So the whole area, really much bigger than what you might think. Plus your accessibility to highways like I-65, I-465, which goes around Indianapolis, I-65 goes down south to Louisville, and of course cuts up through Indianapolis and ends up in Chicago if you were to take it all the way up there. But plenty of access as far as that's concerned, and not just the interstate. You've got other access points to get into Indianapolis, and also travel around through Greenwood really easily and get into some of these other towns like Bargersville or New Whiteland or Southport, tiny little excluded city there in Indianapolis, or any of the other cities and towns that surround Indianapolis. Really fairly easy to do in Greenwood. So if you're thinking about a city outside of Indianapolis to move to, a lot of the cities on the north side, like Carmel, Fishers, Noblesville, Westfield, Zionsville, they seem to get a lot of the notoriety, and it's well deserved. They're extremely nice places. I'm a fan of all of them for a lot of different reasons, but it may be a good idea if you're open geographically to consider a place like Greenwood. Having the different school systems, making it a little bit smaller than what it really is, sometimes is a positive. Plus, Greenwood is a quiet, safe suburb, and it's your typical suburbia for the most part that you would find across a lot of places in the country. Family friendly, housing is a little more affordable in Greenwood and in some of those towns surrounding Greenwood, like I mentioned, than you're gonna have on the north side. You got other places like Brownsburg, Avon, and Plainfield on the west side that are also a touch more affordable, but Greenwood is probably a touch more affordable than even those on average. And given its size, because again, it's bigger than you think, you tend to have a little bit more choice in a place like this or some of the surrounding towns. And you could live in a small town like Bargersville, and it honestly isn't going to feel like you're way out there away from Greenwood. Again, it's going to kind of feel like it just blends together in a lot of cases. So definitely a place that I would consider if it's not on your radar at this point. So if you have any questions at all about Greenwood or any of the cities and towns surrounding Indianapolis or Indianapolis itself, reach out any way that you know how. And until the next one, we'll see you later.